I don't see those two things as mutually exclusive in my mind. We can always choose. It has to be voluntary. So it must be voluntary. And the reason it must be voluntary is because we need to enter into it with spirit and with conviction. And it's not something that we can do because somebody has told us to do it. So at the micro level of a restorative intervention is voluntariness. So therefore, the macro level of implementing this in a school is also voluntariness. So it has to be voluntary, but it's also essential, critical. My argument with the work and other people's argument with the work is that it's necessary, that we really need this work within education anyway, but especially now. And one of the reasons especially now is because of the virtual world. So if we think of the world that our young people inhabit, so the virtual world, for the first time in human history, young people are the masters of the world. They know more about the virtual world than we do as the adults. And so when they're in that world, they need to keep themselves safe and not harm other people. So how do they do that if the adults aren't invigilating, if they're not overseeing that? They do it through their internal moral compass, through their internal regulation. How do we inculcate that knowledge and capacity is through relational and restorative work. So that's why the work is critical, and especially critical now. So one of the ways that things have changed is that when we were at school, there was very much a focus on managing people's behaviour. So how do we manage people's behaviour so that they have behaviour for learning? Whereas what we know now is that young people, and adults as well, they need a different approach. Because the world has changed. Authority when we were younger was given. Authority now is in a different place. And so we need to exercise our authority in different ways. And so one of the ways that we can think about that is that instead of having to manage our children's behaviour when they're with us, what we do, the work we do is to help them develop healthy behaviours. And so how do we do that? We do that through dialogue, we do that through explicitly teaching about behaviour, we do that through collaborative problem solving. So all of that work sits and fits within a restorative and relational approach. So it's what we call, instead of behaviour for learning, we might call it behaviour for living. So what are those core skills, those social and emotional competencies that people need for the workplace, but also for social life, for family life? I challenge the language, I challenge soft skills, the core skills. There's nothing soft about them. There's nothing soft about being emotionally intelligent. There's nothing soft about being resilient in the face of adversity. It's not soft. It's core and essential. So I challenge the language. But I also, there's some mythology around restorative practice. So people can think, well, restorative practice, it's just you do something wrong, you'll sit down, you'll have a nice chat, and everything's fine. That's a misunderstanding. It's a crucial misunderstanding of what this practice is. What that misses from the equation is the whole aspect of accountability and responsibility. So let me explain that a little bit. So restorative practice has an ethical or a moral strand. And that moral strand is, if you've caused harm to somebody, you have a responsibility to put that right. You have a responsibility to repair that harm. So there's an ethical, moral strand there. And if we apply that in schools, it's actually really tough. For you to hold me to account when I've upset or harmed somebody, I have to then put that right. That's really hard work that a lot of adults aren't prepared to step up and do. And we're expecting our young people and helping our young people to step into that braver space where they are held accountable, but they're held accountable with love and compassion. We recognise that they make mistakes. You get it wrong. We recognise that we're human, but we need you to take responsibility when you get it wrong, and we will help you put it right. So that's where it's not soft, it's actually really tough. really is a big ask. The thing I would say in response to that, I was a secondary trained teacher, so I'm used to working with the senior school age students. And now, here at Inventure, for example, I go into primary phase. I never cease to be amazed at the capabilities of children to take responsibility and to want to put it right. You know, the smaller they are, the more eager they are to put it right. As we grow older, we hold on to our grudges and we're less willing to give ground. But actually they do have the innate capabilities, because children have an innate sense of justice. And they do want to put it right, but they need a bit of help to do that sometimes, you know? And so of course, when it comes to the practice, it looks different. If I've got a 5-year-old child and we're working on this, it looks different than if it's a 15-year-old child. We scaffold the approach as we grow through the school. So I've given up trying to convince people. I don't believe my job is to convince people. I believe that my job is to make clear to people what the work is about. And as one head teacher said to me, if people understand it, you can't really deny it. Because if you're an educator, how do you not want children to learn from their mistakes? So it doesn't fit, it can't fit with a philosophy of education as a healthy educator in my perspective. I don't need to convince you. I need to explain to you. I need to help you see where are the opportunities for this to enrich your teaching experience, enrich the learning experience of your children. We need to work on that, because it's not easy work to do. And if you're stressed to deliver the curriculum, of course you're going to find it hard to make that time to do that reconnection work with that child who was difficult in the last lesson. But the danger is, what's the risk of not doing that work? Is that child then builds that resilience and that resistance rather with you, and maybe even with your subject. So what can happen is, you have a difficulty with a child and the child comes to hate maths. And what a big price that is for us not repairing that relationship. So we can't afford not to do it. But what we do need to do, genuinely, is to take seriously the needs and the concerns of teachers. So if a teacher's saying, I'm already packed in my time, I don't have the time to do it, we need to look at the systems in the school and where are the opportunities for them to do it as well. So it's not to convince them, because I believe the ideology fits. If you choose to work in a school like Inventure, which has very strongly named values, then you align with you're signing up to those values, and the restorative values align with Inventure's values. So we don't need to make the case, I would say, in terms of convincing you. What we do need to do is work with you to see how you're going to put that into practice. I also have to declare an obvious thing, which is, my whiteness, my Britishness, and the context in which I work normally is not white British context, but a British school context, and increasingly a European school context. So just to name, so for me to work with Inventure has been a huge learning on lots of fronts. Okay, so we've got that whole thing about Inventure's own thirst and appetite for innovation and doing things differently, and sometimes being countercultural in the way that they do things. And so restorative practice absolutely fits with that. Let's look at doing things differently. So in a way, you need that way in to see, we're going to try something different, we're going to try something new. And what have we seen as a result of that over time? So it was the first year of pandemic, so it was 2000, so we're now into year 3 of this work. And as you say, we started with the faculty, mainly working with them on their knowledge and their attitudes and beliefs and the skills. And we've just started this year to work with students, and we did some work with parents earlier this year. So what have we noticed so far? It's that gradual, slow opening up into this space and thinking and practice that I really enjoy. Being on that journey alongside, that's what's really powerful. And to see the same faces initially in the Zoom room, and now to meet people face to face and to hear the stories, that's the power. Is when I come and see people either online or when I'm here, and they say, oh, this thing happened last week and we had this, and these children are having this conversation, and the children now come and ask me, can I help them sort this out? And it's those stories that I hear that really are a sort of reassurance to me, you know, that the work is making a difference here. Well, that they are doing something right is, I mean, just today there was one, so I went to observe there were 2 grade 3 teachers, that's right, there were 2 grade 3 teachers, and they facilitated a circle with their group, and it was just beautiful work. And it was beautiful the way it happened in the moment, but what was more beautiful was the work that's led up to that moment. That those children were in a space where they knew how to regulate themselves, they knew they could contribute, and they knew how to listen to one another, and it was the work that had led up to that. And then afterwards we were debriefing with some staff, and one of the faculty had been the grade teacher for that group the previous year, and I'd forgotten, but I'd been in on that group when they were last year, and they were highly dysfunctional. And it was just really powerful to see that, you know, through this week in, week out, working in circles, getting them used to that practice, that they've really shifted in how they communicate and how they relate to one another. And it seems how they feel about themselves as well, really powerfully. It's funny you asked that question, because when I was initially trained in this practice 17 years ago, and the woman who trained me, Marg Thorsborn, who's a pioneer in the field, and one of the first questions she asked us, strangely emotional when I reconnect with this question, was, what do you want for the children you teach? I was still teaching children at that time. What do you want for the children? And my answer was self-awareness. Because I believe as an adult that it's knowing myself enables me to make healthy and helpful choices in life. You know, there's something deeply important about that knowledge of self, and the knowledge of the strengths we have within us and the beauty we have within us and how we can be of service in the world. That if we can connect with that, I've always believed as an educator that's the most important work we need to do. How do I feel about myself? The better I feel about myself, the better I'm going to be in the world. So that question's not one that I can give the answer to, because it's an answer that we need to engage, it's a question that we need to engage with together as a community, as adults as well, and working with the young people to know better what their reality is and what their experience is within that world, in that connected disconnection which they seem to inhabit now. Not they seem to inhabit, you know, we're the adults and this has happened on our watch. So I think there's sometimes some really unhealthy blaming of young people as though they inhabit this world that they created, but actually they inhabit the world that we created for them. So let's take some responsibility for that as the adults of this. And how do we help them navigate that world? I'd go back to what I said earlier, is around the other point around, you know, if we can build that internal moral compass, if we can build that knowledge and skills of the importance of not harming others, of taking responsibility for our mistakes, if we do that in the real world, that can translate into that other virtual world. And I think the other thing is, you know, at the heart of relational and restorative practice, it's human. It's human connection and human communication. And no technology is going to remove the need for human connection. So they might be drowning in technological connection, they still need human connection. And this is what the practice enables. So it's there, we need to let them know that that connection is available to them as well. Let me explain it in this way and see if it's helpful. So when we started the work, we would talk about restorative practice. What we now talk about more is relational and restorative practice. And the reason we brought that distinction is there is work that we do to build community, to build relationships. If we have stronger relationships, if I care about you, I'm less likely to harm you. And if I do harm you, I'm more likely to want to put that right because I care about you. I've got an investment in our relationship. So we build relationships as part of the work that we do. The restorative comes in when something's gone wrong and we need to restore. And we need to restore some agency, we need to restore some dignity, we need to restore some quality of relationship. So what that looks like is, there's possibly two core practices we could name. So one is the circle, which connects restorative practice with its indigenous roots. And so in like First Nation communities in North America, so the circle as an intentional space of encounter, where we come together in the circle to share, to listen and to connect. And we can use the circles both proactively to build connection, to get to know one another better, to have a discussion about something that's come into our community. So we might have a conversation around, what could we have a think about? Israel-Palestine. So actually there are different perspectives on that. Let's have an opportunity to share perspectives on what's happening there. So we can use it to build connection. We can also use the circle in a more reparative, sort of resolution way. So when something's gone wrong, we can come together again as a group in circle to address the harm that's been caused. So there are those two main uses of circles. And then there's the other core practice, which is around the question framework. So the questions of telling me the story, what's happened, what's happened to you, thoughts and feelings around that, impact of that, how that's affected you, who else has been affected by that, and what needs there are. And what needs there are that may have led to that incident, but also looking forward, what needs to happen next for that to be put right. So it's a very simple process, but what it does, it gives us a structure to have conversation, either one-to-one or mediated conversation between two people who've had a conflict. So essentially we've got that structure, but we then need to tailor that according to the needs of the context. Okay, so if I'm a teacher, I might use that structure for myself to think through a problem that's going on with a colleague, for example. So I've got a conflict with a colleague, I'm going to use that structure to think, what's going on? What am I thinking about this? What am I feeling? What do I need in this situation? Then I can have a more constructive communication with my colleague around that. Or as a teacher as well, I might use it to help my children reflect if something's gone wrong. I might use it to help two children who've had a fallout to come together to resolve that. I might use that structure with our whole class in a circle structure so that we can address what's going wrong and how we can put that right. So you've got those two core practices, the circle and the question framework. So a term that I've wondered about is, am I a dream monger? Am I just selling dreams to people about the world could be a better place? And I do wonder about that sometimes with humility. But what I know from experience, from empirical evidence, is that the quality of people's experience, the quality of people's relationships changes when they work in this way. And those things matter, so we might not be able to look at a global level of change, but actually where do we have influence? So can we help the people with whom we come into contact have more constructive dialogue, to feel better at the end of their day? So those things do matter to me. The other thing that heartens me about the work is I know that the field is populated with some of the wisest, most compassionate people with integrity that I've come across in my life. So the people who populate the field, if I'm allied with them, this is the field that I want to be in. So lots comes to mind with that. You can ask my husband, he'll tell you. But I have changed a lot. But there's a quote that I've never managed to find who says it, which is that I learn so that I can teach, and I teach so that I can learn. And it's exactly why I do it. I do the work because I am sort of irrepressibly curious about life. And also it's the conflict offers us up so many opportunities for learning that we shy away from. It's really untapped potential within conflict. I'm avoiding the question. So what have I learned? I've learned I think to be a bit more humble and consider that even if my intention wasn't bad, I may still have caused some harm. Yeah, and to listen to somebody openly and not defensively, I can hear something that might be a bit uncomfortable, but that's where I need to be able to lean into. I need to be able to lean into the discomfort of I may well have caused harm, and then to go back and reflect on that and come back with what can I do to make that better. So just on a very personal level, the quality of my personal relationships is vastly improved. And what have I learned as well is that people really do have the answers to their own problems. That what we need to do is work with them with love and compassion and patience. Patience, I think, is a really underestimated quality in the work. Work with them to enable them to come to their own answers for their own situations. So yeah, I think what I've learned is that my faith and trust in people is validated through this work. That's a really great question. It will be two things. It will be so embedded that it won't even have a name. So it will just be part of the Inventure culture. That's what it will be. At the same time, Inventure will be, the image that I've got in my head is a light. That's a light for other schools to see. That other schools will be coming here. I will be sending other schools to Inventure to see what this looks like and what this can achieve. So it will be both of those things. It will be invisible, but then so present that you can't avoid it.